Good morning, Radio Land of Indianapolis and our nationwide audience. Also, special thanks to all our Facebook friends who sent us these nice messages during the course of the show. Locally, you can reach us at 317-239-1310. And you could also tune in on the internet and with 1310 The Light Indianapolis. Today, our show, we deal with current legal issues each week. And I'm fortunate to have some of the top lawyers in America on our show each week. We start off with Bonita Banks, who's prior president of the National Bar, master's in law, technical research analyst for us. Also, she keeps up with all legal issues, just amazing attorney. Then Milton Grimes, world famous trial lawyer, John Sweeney. So we have some of the top trial lawyers in America each week on our show. But today we start off with a sad note. Unfortunately, we had a legal giant, and we'll start off with Attorney Banks. Tell us about it.
Good morning, Attorney Lee, and thank you for having me. Yesterday was a very sad day, and there are no words to express the loss of the incomparable Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a champion and trailblazer, a pioneer of rights for women, immigrants, and disabled people. And she powerfully moved our nation forward and closer to achieving a more perfect union and equality and justice for everyone. She's the second woman appointed to the Supreme Court. She was appointed by President Clinton. She changed the face of our nation's highest court, and she dedicated her life to women's rights and equality in both her position as on the Supreme Court, as well as the time in which she served as general counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union, and that was a high watermark for the ACLU. She simply was one of the most brilliant minds that our country has ever seen. And she was so much more than a civil rights and Supreme Court justice. She was a role model, and she was an icon for a whole generation of young women who learned so much, not only from those opinions in which she wrote as a member of the majority, but her fiery dissents and her strong advocacy that women, all women, deserve to be heard, respected, and in fact represented in the highest level of our nation's judiciary. And so yesterday was a sad day, and today we honor her memory and her legacy, which will endure forever.
Attorney Sweeney, how did that affect the cases?
Yeah, Bonita just gave a great eulogy, a tribute to Justice Ginsburg. So I won't go along those lines, but let me say this. Her death thrust this issue of appointing a new Supreme Court justice into the election platform of both Republicans and Democrats is hugely, hugely important. The issue is going to be whether or not the Republicans can fast track a new appointee, and whether or not the Senate can confirm within the time that Trump has left, even if he's voted out of office. The issue is, can a president who will no longer be president come January, does he have the power and influence to get this done in that short period of time? And let me just end by saying, I'll turn it over to Milton, that it is hugely important, this swing vote.
Office. The issue is, can a
I hear
president
an echo. I hear an echo. Okay, that's better. Yeah, this swing vote is hugely important, and let's not forget that going back to the Plessy versus Ferguson decision in the 1800s, the Justice Harlan, who was the Chief Justice of that court, wrote a dissenting opinion to Plessy. And as for the listeners, Plessy versus Ferguson in the 1800s set up legal apartheid. But Justice Harlan said that the majority it is. I'm sorry. The majority said that it's possible for segregated facilities to be equal. Thus, segregation does not violate the 14th Amendment. Justice Harlan dissented on that, and it was hugely important for the direction and history of Black folk, because we're still suffering the effect of 80 years of segregation, as we know, until 1954, when it was overturned by the Warren Court, Brown versus Board of Education. So I say that to give a historical perspective to the importance of the appointment of this next Supreme Court justice. It's a great loss, and it'd be very, very interesting to see what happens.
Attorney Grimes?
Well, I would hope that the Republicans follow what they set as a precedent when Obama was in his term, and they wanted to wait until the newly elected president made the decision on the replacement or the filling of the Supreme Court justice position. I think that would be the right thing to do. But knowing they won't necessarily do the right thing, I think we just have to be ready to fight against the current president replacing such a vital person, filling such a vital position in our society that our future is going to depend on. And it would not be right. It is not the just thing to do for him to appoint a Supreme Court justice. And we're going to have to do everything within our power and ability to stop it. I understand Mr. McConnell has already lined up, ready to start the process. Somehow we're going to have to figure out a way to prevent that. Nathaniel?
Well, for my comment, this is very important, a personal issue with me and my litigation practice. One of the judges at the top of the list is a judge that was on the Day versus City of Indianapolis case. In the Day case, the court, for these ministers, we have a lot of African-American ministers who don't like the idea of abortion. And I understand that, I get that. But for those ministers who listen to this, there's something very important that I need to tell you about why this is such an important issue. You may be against a certain politician on the abortion issue, but consider this. Here's the alternative. On the civil rights issue, the Trump appointee on my case said, in a nutshell, that if you are being killed by a police officer under this qualified immunity, that you have to articulate to the officer why you dying. You know, it's the most absurd thing I've ever seen. So what that says is that in every case where Black males are being tortured, using excessive force, if they don't say the magical words, they don't have a case. So if you're concerned about abortion rights and things like that, I want you to think about every time you leave your house, and that there's a law now in our Seventh Circuit that is so bad in terms of rights of African-American males. And so this Supreme Court, these narrow decisions that they've made, 5-4 decision, our civil liberties are now at risk. The history that Attorney Sweeney talked about, our country is going in the wrong direction now. Not just this pandemic and the way that it's being handled. This pandemic now we know is close to criminal in terms of how it was handled by the administration. We now know that the president knew about this, and yet we got, as of today, we have about 200,000 Americans have died. So, as a segue, today we're talking about the voter protection issue and things like that. But I want you to know that you need to make sure that you look out your front door, look both ways. Your neighbors, your friends, everybody, we're all in. You got to make sure that everybody votes this time. We can't leave 40% of people not voting this time. For example, the Trump approval rating, he's got a core group that even if you shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, that 40% stays with him. But folks, that means that 60% are not with him. So we have to make sure those 60%, at least 75% of those folks get out and vote. The only way we lose the election, the numbers have to be below that 140 million level. In other words, we have to get the voter participation past the Obama turnout level on the Democrat side. Just keep that in mind. And that means that in the African American community that matters, we have to get closer to 75% and not 60-some%. Okay, now, thank you for those tributes to RBG. And our show today, of course, we're talking about voter protection and things like that. Now, before we start off, we'll take one call. Imhotep's on the line, so we'll take this call before we lead into our program. Imhotep, you have a question for us today, a comment?
Hey, how you doing, Brother Nate? Thanks for taking my call. Very important what you just said there. Tony, Grimes is still with you, right? No, Mr. Grimes is with you. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, speak up as loud as you can.
Okay, yeah. I just echoed that, what you were just saying about a lot of these ministers and using the wedge issue of abortion, not understanding the totality of when you look at rights, civil rights, and the protections from people and stuff like that. We have that problem now, and I'd like Mr. Grimes to address if he can. We have a large segment of ministers here in the city that want to continue to see a police occupation thing called Operation Legend, which we know from research. We just had Dr. Carter on from IU, School of Public Policy, and the research from D. Ross that said we know it's not working. More police has never been a deterrent or an issue with stopping crime. You have societal factors, things like that, which they do not want to address. Charles Harrison and Pastor James Jackson are fervently in the FOP's pocket. You can read their Twitter pages. They support Rick Snyder. They hate this new civilian review committee that's going to be championed. They don't want it at all. So maybe Mr. Grimes can give us an opinion on why is it the very people who claim to follow Dr. King do not understand that the totality of the freedom and liberty of all people, especially black people, have to come above always looking and thinking and being a part of the status quo. Because we notice that this present civilian review board we had in Indianapolis has no teeth. So we need to do something different to try to get a handle on police behavior. It's out of control. And thanks for taking my call, Nate.
Well, I don't think I'm necessarily qualified only to answer that question. I am disappointed with our clergy, oftentimes with the political position they take in support of this present government that is very suppressive of African Americans. And I think we have to stand up to them when that occurs. Gates and the rest of it, they have to be called on and called out when they do something against the interests of the people, and especially the African American people. So I don't have the answer to that question, sir. I do know it's problematic. Mr. Sweeney, I think, accompanied one of our religious leaders lately to John Lewis's service. Maybe he has some insight on that question.
Well, Sweeney, your case was kind of highlighted this week. That sheriff in your county, they talked about those massive settlements that you talked about earlier. That was on the news I saw in the last couple of days when he asked Ron James to put up $100,000.
Yeah, that sheriff is, I don't know how much longer he's going to be there, Sheriff Villanueva. Uh, the board of supervisors, which is the most powerful politicians in Los Angeles County, have asked for his ouster, asked for him to step down. The civilian oversight committee has asked him to step down. Him asking folks to put up rewards for the capture of the assailant of those two deputy sheriffs was unusual to ask LeBron James to do something like that. And on a personal note, he was on a CNN show just the other night, and he defamed me. He They asked Aaron Burnett, the host of CNN's Out Front show, asked him about the executioners gang within the city of Compton, the sheriff station in the city of Compton, and he said that that term was made up by a lawyer at a deposition referring to me, which is a total lie because his own deputies said it. So I don't have very good things to say about this guy, and I think he will be out very soon.
Attorney Banks?
I thought the caller's question was related to the clergy, though. That's why I asked John.
Well, it's got, yeah, different components.
Milton, you said that you mentioned that that I had accompanied. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your.
I thought you took Minister Laurie to the airport to go to John Lewis's funeral, and maybe you had some discussions with him that will give some insight as to what's happening with the clergy in today's times that this young man was speaking of.
Right. I didn't quite understand the young man's question, but if it's talking about the role of the clergy, the black clergy during these times, and let me just back up and explain to the
That's what I for him to be talking.
Explain to the listeners what Milton Grimes was talking about. I am very good friends with Reverend James Lawson, the preeminent civil rights icon who was the architect of the nonviolent aspect of the civil rights struggle. He was the mentor, teacher to John Lewis. And John Lewis, Representative Lewis, asked Reverend Lawson to speak at his funeral because he knew he was very sick, and asked Reverend Lawson. And I called Reverend Lawson and to give him, express my condolences about the loss of his student John Lewis, and also the great C.T. Vivian, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was another civil rights icon, on the same day. And I asked him, and he told me he was going to speak, and I said, Reverend Lawson, how are you getting to the airport? And he said, well, I'm going to drive, and I'll leave my car there. Well, Reverend Lawson is 92, so I got my driver to pick him up, take him. And but I did have some discussion with him. I just wanted to give some background as to what Milton was talking about with Reverend Lawson. But anyway, I did have a discussion with him, and understand that Black ministers were the backbone of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. The Black churches were the targets of white supremacists in Birmingham, Alabama, and other places, and have historically been the target of white supremacists. And I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and I worshipped at Mother Emanuel AME Church in January of this year. And as we know, Mother Emanuel was a target of that racist Dylan Roof, who shot those innocent 8 parishioners, and also the great pastor and politician Clementa Pinckney on that terrible evening. And that church historically has been the target of white supremacists because it was burnt down after Denmark Vesey's slave insurrection plot was uncovered, because he started that church. So getting back to modern times, I think that the Black clergy has earned a right to have a powerful voice in Black decision making. And we have other people. We have athletes who are speaking out. We have obviously lawyers. We have the great Vanita Banks, who has led the greatest bar association in America, even more so than the ABA. The NBA it has more of a social impact than any bar association in America. So we have all kinds of, we have a multi-pronged attack to any social problems that affect Black people, from the clergy to lawyers to politicians to celebrities to athletes. I hope that answers the question. I wasn't so sure what the question was, but I hope that answers the caller's question.
Attorney Banks?
Well, I think that Attorney Sweeney really, said it all in terms of that issue with respect to the powerful impact of the clergy throughout history. And I think his comments are a great segue into our topic today regarding in this election, we must vote like our lives depend on it, because they actually do. And I wanted to just pick up a point that was made earlier by you, Attorney Lee, regarding that the numbers really have to increase in November. And I'm confident that they can. There were 100 million voters in 2016 elections that were eligible to vote and did not vote. There are roughly around 240 million eligible voters in the United States, and approximately 140 million of those voters are poor or low-income voters. And we rarely saw in 2016 anyone speaking to those voters. And we also saw in those states, as many of us were devastated that evening in 2016, that if we look closely, we'll see that the margins of those elections were shockingly close. For example, in Michigan, that election could have been flipped by only 10,000 votes. And so Reverend William Barber, a nationally and globally recognized pastor and civil rights leader, through his Poor People's Campaign, is galvanizing hopefully 140 million poor and low-income citizens in this nation around issues that impact their communities, issues of education and healthcare and housing and social justice. And they've coined the theme that voting is power unleashed. And many times we hear the conversation around, well, I just don't like this candidate. This election is not about, and we can't afford to, because we're dying every day as we try to survive in the midst of 3 pandemics: COVID-19, police brutality, and voter suppression. We have to vote and have a bigger strategic perspective. We have to vote for candidates that are speaking to and have plans to establish and implement policy and legislation that's going to address the issues that are killing us, literally killing us in our communities.
Okay, we have one caller that we will address at this time. Caller, you have a question for us today?
Yes, and I think it's even more drastic now that we got a Supreme Court judge who just passed away, and we got this lunatic in the White House going to do everything he can to overturn Obamacare, voting rights. Let's just make one thing clear: Republicans are not our friends. And I ain't all that crazy about the Democrats either, even though I'm a registered Democrat. What I'm just saying is we got to get out and vote, because we got people who have their total interest is to turn back the clock. As far as black ministers, that's pretty much a gray area, because you got some black ministers who are supporting the Republican Party, who is doing everything they can to turn the clock back. I don't get it. I got a problem with that. So, and then where are the black pastors who have progressive ideals and knowing that our community is under siege? So, yeah, we got to get, we got to look at the big picture. We got to forget about the lesser two evils, whatever, because white evangelicals don't care about the lesser two evils. They got an agenda. We need an agenda. Thank you.
I agree with this young man. And
Go ahead.
okay, the young man that started this on his question, I was thinking about it as we were talking, and I go back to it because I remember in my back of my mind the photo op that Trump had with black ministers. And I shared this young man concern. I hope that, I know we can't have unanimity, 100% of athletes feel this way or 100% of lawyers feel this way, because we are a diverse society and we have diverse ideas. But I have the same concern that young man had about our clergy. I believe that they have a position and a responsibility to lead our people and to stand for what's right, and not to just side with a politician who comes along when he needs them and take a picture. So I do have a concern. You have a president who's considering shooting a heat ray, an experimental weapon, war weapon, against the people who were protesting that day he went and held the Bible upside down. This man is sick, and he is, I don't want to get religious on his definition of what he is, but this man scares me. And if our black ministers don't stand up to him, they're not helping our people. So I would hope, that's why John Sweeney, that the majority of them are in a position to continue to fight, that I've always looked at them as carrying on. But I'm concerned that they are not.
Well, let me just say that I think it's a small minority of black ministers who are part of a photo op for Trump. I think probably over 95% of black ministers are seeking to oust him out of the White House. I think that it was such a contrast in the fact that he got this photo op with these ministers. I think he used it to his advantage, but I don't think that is that's a small minority of misguided Uncle Toms. Let's just say that.
Okay.
Let me say this, Nathaniel. The last caller said something very, very profound, and it didn't go past me. He said that this president is trying to turn back the clock. That is exactly what is happening. He is trying to turn back the clock to how America was prior to the civil rights movement. He is trying to re-implement white supremacy because he sees that the The country is changing. It's the browning of America. And that is his whole goal in his presidency. And if he gets 4 more years, it's going to set this country back. It would take us 80 to 100 years, more time than all of us sitting here and listeners have on this earth to change it back. So we have to get this guy out of here. Definitely. No question about it. We have to get out there and vote. And there needs to be, I know, Nathaniel, you are very big and influential in the Democratic Party. There has to be a blitzkrieg of advertising and campaign literature in October and leading up to the election, because I just don't see it right now. I don't know if we are, as Democrats, are waiting. I see commercials and everything, but I want to see a blitzkrieg of commercials revealing exactly what I just said. That this guy is trying to turn back the clock, and it's not good for America.
Okay, let's go to the line and take this next caller, and then we get back to this. Okay, caller, you have a question for us today.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Mr. Lee.
Good morning.
Should we hold Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate feet to the fire about not allowing Trump to pick a Supreme Court justice, just like they did with President Obama when he was nearing the end of his term? I think I heard, I forget who it was, saying that they're going to immediately try to pick somebody, allow Trump to pick a Supreme Court nominee, and they're going to quickly confirm it. Shouldn't they do the same thing like they did Obama? And I'll take the answer off there. Thanks.
Attorney Banks?
Well, with respect to President Obama and his nomination of Merrick Garland, that nomination was a year before the election, and the position was taken that the people should elect the next Supreme Court justice, and that nomination should occur after the election. And so they stonewalled that and forbid that nomination. Now we're less than 50 days from the election, and from my perspective, that rule applies and should be mandated and insisted on. What do you think?
That's true.
Go on, Nathaniel.
The number one thing too, Attorney Banks, that's trending, we get these texts off Facebook, and what's trending now is that the people are reacting to what these calls are saying, and they're saying, thank you, Ms. Taylor, for this really nice comment. She says that we're all on the same page as relate to this administration. What's the plan moving forward? Let me answer that a couple of ways, because I've been watching each day this week. I've been on 1 to 3 Zoom calls about what's going on in the campaign. And what occurs in a political campaign now, it becomes a campaign that involves about 7 states, as it turns out. And so if you're in Florida, you're going to see 20 commercials per day. You're going to see people calling you, text you, email. If you're in Arizona, same thing. If you're in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and so there are certain states now whereby the Democrats are spending about $300 million, because right now, the way the elections are done, because we have to use the Electoral College, we start off with about, right now we start off with about 210 to 220 electoral votes. So in order to get to that 270 magical numbers, you have to win certain states. You need to, if you win Florida, we win the presidency. Because without Florida, there's a 0% chance that Trump could win. So Florida become the key battleground in this election. However, though, if we win Arizona, that gives us an opportunity we can lose there's a certain amount of revenue, although the Democrat took in $360 million back there in August. Television advertisement is very expensive. There's a full throttle campaign staff. Now, what the Democrats are doing differently than the Republican is that the Republicans are putting boots on the ground, and the Democrat is doing a electronic type of apparatus. They're calling people, they're emailing, they're texting. And what the Democrats are doing that differently, so our callers know this, is that they're not exposing people to the disease process. Now you got to remember something very important. Dr. Gupta said something very important this week. He said that when this pandemic was first announced and learned about by Trump, that 90% of the people who would have been educated at that point in time would have been ordered to wear masks. We had a national situation where everybody in the country is given masks. Now you got to remember, as part of the process, the U.S. Postal Service was prepared to send out 650 million masks. So if we had done that simple thing, 90% of the folks that have died would still be alive. And so the point is that a large percentage of these COVID-19 victims of people are African Americans. So this has impacted our community more than any other community proportionally. So what's the plan going forward? The number one plan going forward by the Democrat is that we have to get this disease under control. We have to use science. We have to stop having people die. Right here in Indianapolis, there's so many dead bodies that we have 4 refrigerated trucks with dead bodies. So folks, this pandemic is real. We have to wear masks. We have to do all the safety precautions. We have to stay safe. So that's the number one priority. Then beyond that, of course, we have to get people back to work. But just keep that in mind. Now, also, the last day to register, okay, folks are calling in. The last day to register to vote in Indiana, you get 30 days, but go online today. Don't wait till the last minute, folks. You're here in Indiana. Go online today. You can register on the internet. Go to the Marion County election website or the state website. You can register to vote on the internet. And also, early voting starts in our state 30 days before the election. And I'm not relying on the mail. We're talking about voter protection. Folks, I'm not going to rely on the mail this time, U.S. mail, because I've had some bad experience lately with the mail. And thank you, Facebook people, for pointing that out. Okay.
Attorney Lee?
Yes, go ahead.
Attorney Lee, there was a poll of reliable voters to your point about relying on the mail. And of course, many of our citizens that are historically reliable voters, including our seniors and those over age 65, those of our citizens that may be disabled or sick and shut in, may not be able to vote in person. But when reliable voters have been polled recently, I was happy to hear that 52% of them said that they're going to vote in person. So if we're talking about, let's just say roughly 180 million people, that means that over 90 million people are saying that they plan to go to the polls. And of course, we have to ensure that our people can exercise their right to vote and do it safely and socially distanced. And so that's why it's critically important that, and the National Bar Association is leading this effort in partnership and with our sponsors and other coalition partners to ensure that people have masks and visors to put on top of those masks, and gloves and sanitizer and water and umbrellas. You should be taking all of those things to the polls to ensure that you can vote safely if you're planning to vote in person. And at least polls are suggesting that over 55% of reliable voters are saying that they're going to try to vote in person. And I'm so happy to hear that. I'm planning to vote in person. I'm planning to early vote. And in many states, early voting has already started. Let me also point out that September 22nd, is that Monday or Tuesday, is National Voter Registration Day. And Attorney Lee just referenced the importance to ensure that you are registered to vote. And I just want to point out there are 4 types of voting. One is voting in person, and the second is if you vote in person, please try to vote early if possible. Second is absentee voting or voting by mail. And there is a fourth option that I wish more states would avail itself of, and that is drive-in voting, where you can just drive up to various locations in your city and in your car and actually drop off your ballot. Let me stop there.
Hey, Attorney Sweeney, there's a question directed from you over the internet. It's about whether or not there's a fund established there in LA for civil rights, like voting protections and police brutality. And they says that they have Carl Douglas out there, and the fund was supposedly established by Colin Kaepernick. You know anything about that?
I do not know anything. You said it's a fund?
Yeah, the internet person say, wait a second. He said that Pierre, he says that Colin Kaepernick established a legal defense fund to help civil rights lawyers. He talks about Carl Douglas out here in California. And
Yeah, I don't know about that fund. Milton, do you know anything about that?
I got a text from Carl Douglas earlier this week, but I didn't see a joining of Colin Kaepernick, and I did not see it as a fundraiser for civil rights attorneys. I'm strolling my messages now, but no, I do not know anything about that particular fundraiser.
okay,
Let's make a pledge to the caller. I'll research it and listen next week, caller, and I will find the answer to your question.
okay, now one thing too that I need to announce, the callers want to know. Okay, when we're talking about early voters, Michigan, the states that matters, folks, that you send me the text on. In Michigan, absentee voting starts 40 days before the election. So voting in Michigan gonna really be starting next week. Sounds like in the state of Florida. Florida got a very restricted voting pattern. It's 10 days before the election, which is pretty bad, I think. But Florida, we have to really get all hands on deck in Florida. So you have friends and relatives, people down in Florida. We need to establish something to make sure that folks vote early. Yeah, I don't like the mail. There's some problem with U.S. mail, but if we can get voted early, I like that as an option. I know Attorney Banks talked about people that are sick and shut in, elderly. I get that, but you young, healthy folks, go vote in person. Now, while I'm doing that, let's go to the next caller real quickly. Caller, you have a question for us.
This is Pierre and Nate. The question was for the attorneys out there in LA. Those civil rights lawyers out there and across the country, they go into court every day fighting civil rights cases, but they don't have the money to do what they need to do to conduct the investigations and all of that to fight those cases. And what I was asking was, as Colin Kaepernick, and it was meant to be a criticism of him and others. They talk about police brutality and fighting police brutality, but those guys have enough influence that at Colin Kaepernick's height of his influence, he could have put $25 million in an account in a week to fight police brutality. And those lawyers out there, they're fighting with their arms tied behind their back, like Burris and the guy on and the fellow on your program now, and John Burris up there, and I guess he's in Sacramento. They fight like you know what against these police brutality against these cities, and they just don't have the legal resources to do what they can. And I said, as Colin Kaepernick established the Legal Defense Fund to help these lawyers and lawyers across the country to do what they need to do. I don't think he has. And that was the question. And I want to thank you for taking my call.
I want to respond, please, while we're on the
Wait a
air.
second. Well, John, and I need to respond to that. Pierre, I tell you what, I'm letting my expert, because we're actually people that try these cases and fund these. So go ahead, John.
Yeah. It's a good point, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. All the funds we can use, we welcome, but I have not heard about a pot of money that has been raised to help us with these cases. But let me say, I've been doing this for 40 years. I finance my cases myself. Some of them cost as much as $125,000. I'm talking about civil rights cases. I fund them out of my pocket. Every civil right, and I know every civil rights lawyer who in California who is well known. It's a small group of lawyers, and there are about 10 of us statewide who do these cases consistently. And we all finance our own cases. We've always financed our own cases. But if there is some type of fund, and I see Milton raising his hand, that we can tap into because they're very, very expensive, I would welcome that. But it raises all kinds of questions. Who qualifies to tap into this fund if there is a fund? So anyway, Milton, go ahead.
What I have here from Carl from September 3rd. Okay, guys, I rarely ask this, but this election is so important that I am part of a leadership team raising money for Joe and Kamala to defeat the Orange Man. I am asking everyone as a personal favor to me to contribute a little something supporting my efforts to make a change if you can. Talk is cheap. Now is the time to act. But he was soliciting or is soliciting funds for the political campaign, the election, to help support Joe and Kamala. There is no Colin Kaepernick attached to this notice from Carl Douglas.
Yeah.
Could I jump in here?
Go ahead, Attorney Banks.
Well, there has historically been the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that helps to finance these types of cases. And then there's also the Lawyers Committee as well. But I can say that about a year ago that I was in communications and discussions directly about this whole aspect of establishing a fund for civil rights lawyers to pursue these police brutality cases with, the globally known African-American billionaire, Robert Smith. And so I agree with the caller that we should galvanize the wealth and power that we already have within our community to move forward with actually establishing this type of fund to assist our civil rights attorneys in bringing and funding these cases, because as my colleagues on this call well knows, they're very, very expensive to finance, and John has indicated he finances them out of his own pocket. But those conversations have been commenced. In fact, there was a group that joined Robert Smith at his ranch to talk about this very same issue. And I think we should move forward to seeing how that we can make that happen. What do you think?
Well, personally, in the last 39 years, I financed all these cases I successfully tried, police misconduct. I actually financed them myself. And what Attorney Sweeney was talking about, here's what's involved in a typical police misconduct case. You will have somewhere between 8 to 10 depositions in a typical case that you have to take. You have to have the resources to track down witnesses. You have to have knowledge of how the process works. So in other words, there's lawyers that go on TV and talk about cases. There are lawyers that try cases, right? That's what I do. These lawyers try cases. And when you try cases, you kind of know what evidence you have to fine tune right away. And so once you collect the evidence doesn't change. Like, for example, the Attorney General in Kentucky was talking about this Breonna Taylor case. That case has been going on for 6 months. The evidence hasn't changed. And so they should have acted on that back 6 months ago, but they're apparently delaying it. And what happened in a case like that, so you know, caller, the critical aspect of evidence changes to the benefit of police officers, and here's why. In these cases that justice is delayed, the police officers have an opportunity to talk to their lawyers, they combine their stories, they have access to evidence, and so they synchronize their story. They have a very narrow defense, and it's always self-defense or I was in fear of my life. And so the point I'm making is, yes, these cases are expensive, but you need to go to the right lawyers because we actually finance these cases without public input. Go ahead, Attorney Sweeney.
I agree.
Don't forget, Milton and Nathaniel, I'll let you jump in, Milton, in a second. Don't forget expert witnesses. Expert witnesses may come from anywhere from medical experts if the person was not killed, to forensic pathologists, independent forensic pathologists, to police practices experts, to ballistics experts. That can run you right there, those experts, $75,000. So I'm sorry, Milton, go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, you brought out, I agree with you with the cost, and the King cost was 180 some thousand. I just spent 200 some thousand on King, 280. I just spent 175,000 on a civil rights case in Miami. So the costs can be pretty high, and it gets complicated when you start borrowing money from various entities to support the financing of these cases. In case you lose, what do you do? If you win, what percentage do they want? It's not as simple as there's a pile of money over here to go and get and support the attack on this case. It gets real complex. And I haven't seen that complexity get better over the years. And I've been practicing 46 years, and I've financed all of my cases myself, or I've had the luck at times to borrow some money. But it's not as easy as having a big pot of gold over here to use.
Not going to happen, Milton. It's not going to happen.
I don't think so either, John. I'm just trying to say it in a nice way.
And we could spend a whole hour talking about litigation financing companies.
Well,
I said we could spend a whole hour talking about litigation financing companies and the issues associated therewith.
It sounds good, but it just doesn't happen, guys.
I like to thank my superstar panels. We're at the end of our show. Next week, I need to tell all callers we have a very important show. We're heading to the election now, so we're going to be talking about these election issues. So the legal issue of today is that how do we make sure we get everybody out to vote to change the trajectory? We've talked about, we're looking at some draconian type results unless we change the course of history as the way we're headed now. So we'll be talking next week. We're going to also include some of the college students throughout the country next week with our expert panel. So please join us next week as we continue to talk about legal issues of today. And don't forget, go out and vote. Make sure you register. Look to your left, look to your right. Make sure your neighbors vote. Thank you. God bless you.
All right, Nate.
Thank you. Great show.